There are women who survive quietly, not because they have no voice, but because they have learned the hard way, the long way, that some battles are won not by fighting, but by enduring long enough to outlast the thing trying to break you. Sandra Obi was one of those women, and this is her story. Sandra grew up on Bello Street in Ibadan, in a house with a big mango tree in the compound, and blue curtains her mother had sewn by hand from a fabric she bought at Dogbe Market. Her mother, Agnes, was the kind of woman who made a house feel like a person, warm, specific, and full of a particular presence that you did not think about until it was gone. Agnes died on a Sunday, a fever that came on Wednesday and did not leave. Sandra was 14 years old, and after the burial, she would sometimes walk into the sitting room and stand in front of the blue curtains and just breathe, because they still smelled faintly of the way her mother moved through a room. Her father, Patrick, was a secondary school vice principal, a serious, decent man, the kind of man who ironed his shirts on Saturday evenings and always had a kind word for the gateman and remembered to ask after people's children by name. He loved Agnes the way quiet men love, not loudly, not with gestures, but with every ordinary day showing up and being present. Her death broke something in him that he did not know how to name and could not find how to repair. 2 years later, his sister Auntie Cordelia began mentioning a woman, a widow, sensible, good family. Sandra was 16 when she sat in the living room and watched her father shake hands with a woman named Vivian, who came in wearing a pale green wrapper and a smile that was a little too wide and arrived a little too quickly. The kind of smile that has been practiced. Sandra was 16. She told herself to be fair. She told herself grief makes people lonely, and loneliness makes people do things that seem fast from the outside. She told herself her father deserved to be happy. She was still telling herself to be fair when Vivian moved in 11 months later with 2 large suitcases, a box of kitchen things, and her 12-year-old son from her first marriage. A thin, watchful boy named Kenneth, who moved through the house quietly and always seemed to know where Sandra was without looking directly at her. The changes came the way water changes a riverbank, not all at once. Slowly, consistently, patiently, until the shape of everything is different, and you almost cannot remember what it looked like before. Agnes's blue curtains were the first to go. Vivian replaced them with heavy burgundy ones that made the sitting room feel like a different room in a different house. The back steps where Sandra and Patrick used to sit after dinner and look at the sky became nobody's place. Patrick's evening routines shifted, then disappeared. The man who had known every star in that sky became a man Sandra had to look for inside the man sitting across from her at dinner. The kitchen was where it showed most clearly. Vivian cooked. Vivian decided what was cooked. Vivian portioned the plates, and the portioning spoke its own language. Patrick's plate always full and hot. Kenneth's always generous. And Sandra's always last and always smaller in that deliberate way that is designed to be deniable if challenged. Sandra ate what she was given. She said, "Thank you." She cleared the table. She washed the plates. She was 17, learning the shape of endurance without knowing she was being enrolled in that particular school. The night she came home from the library on the bus, it was her first year at Polytechnic. She was 19. And found a clean pot on the stove. She understood that the pot had not been cleaned because dinner was finished. It had been cleaned while she was still on the road coming home. She went to her room. She ate a biscuit from her bag. She drank water from the tap. She lay in the dark and made herself a promise: finish school, find work, and never need to be fed in this house again. She kept that promise. Sandra graduated and moved to Lagos. Account management for a logistics firm. She rented a 1-room in Surulere with her friend Philomena, who cooked too much pepper in everything and laughed at her own jokes before the punchline. Sandra loved that flat with an almost embarrassing intensity. the freedom of cooking what she wanted, eating when she chose, her own provisions on her own shelf. No one deciding her portion. She called Patrick every Sunday. She came home at Christmas. She was pleasant to Vivian at those visits, not out of forgiveness, but out of the pragmatic love of a daughter who understood that peace with her father required a working truce with his wife. She was 26. She was building something. Slowly, the way people who come from nothing build. Carefully, without safety nets, but with absolute intention. Then the company restructured. Her position was dissolved in March. 1 month's salary, 2 weeks' notice, corporate language wrapped around what was essentially a door closing in her face. 4 months of applications in Lagos. 4 months of interviews where she was told she was impressive and then not called back. Her savings thinned, then became critical. Philomena's sister came to stay, and the one room became too small for 3 people, and the tension of close quarters. In July, Sandra packed one bag and called her father. Just for a few months, she told him, just while I find something. He said, come. He said, of course, come home. And the warmth in his voice on the phone, the old warmth, the back steps warmth, the star-pointing warmth, made something loosen in her chest that she had been holding tight for years. She got on the bus to Ibadan with one bag and a folder of CVs and the tired hope that family meant safety. Vivian was at the corridor when she arrived. She smiled. Welcome back, she said. Let me show you where I've put you. The room was at the back of the house, a former study. Patrick's books were stacked on the floor because the shelves had been removed to fit in the narrow bed against the wall. The window looked into the compound back wall. The ceiling fan worked but made a grinding noise on the third setting. Just temporary, Sandra told herself. She had been home 3 weeks when she cooked the rice. She had woken at 5:30 before the compound stirred, before Vivian was in the kitchen. She had a small bag of rice, her own tin of tomato, sardines from her provisions box. She stood over the little 2-burner stove and cooked it carefully. It took close to an hour. She managed the heat with patience, adjusted the lid, watched the steam. She was proud of it in the small private way you are proud of small things when small things are the extent of your current world. She was lifting the pot when Vivian walked into the kitchen. What is this? My food, Sandra said. I cooked it with my own things. Vivian looked at the pot. She did not raise her voice. She did not argue. She simply reached out and took the pot from Sandra's hands with the calm authority of a woman who had decided long ago that everything within these walls belonged to her. And she walked to the bin and emptied it. The sound of the rice hitting the bin liner was quiet. Ordinary. She set the pot in the sink and turned on the tap. Next time, she said, Sandra, you ask before you use my kitchen, even with your own things. You are a guest here. Sandra stood in the kitchen with her empty hands. From the sitting room, she could hear the morning news on low volume, the creak of Patrick's chair. He was there. He had heard the whole thing. The kitchen sounds carried clearly. The pot, the bin, Vivian's voice. Sandra waited. She waited the way you wait when you still have enough belief left to think someone will come. She counted in her head. 1, 2, 3 minutes. And she heard only the news and the running tap, and then the sounds of Vivian beginning to prepare her own breakfast. She picked up her empty pot. She washed it. She dried it. She walked back to the grinding fan room, sat on the narrow bed, and looked at the floor for a long time. That was not the moment she broke. She had too much endurance left for that. But it was the moment the endurance began to have an expiry date. She had a friend across town, Grace Adeyemi, since secondary school, still close, now married with a baby she carried everywhere in a worn carrier. Grace had been calling every week since Sandra came back, and Sandra had been softening the truth every week. Fine, managing, you know how things are. protecting Grace from the full weight, the way women protect people they love. 10 days after the kitchen, Sandra walked 40 minutes to Grace's flat because she was rationing her transport money. Grace opened the door, looked at her face, and said nothing. She stepped aside and put the kettle on. Sandra sat at Grace's kitchen table and ate fried eggs and bread and tea with too much sugar and told her friend everything. Not managed, not softened. Everything. The pot in the bin, the grinding fan, the 12 years of small plates, the morning news playing while she stood in the kitchen. With empty hands and her father's chair did not move. Grace listened to all of it. Then she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I have a cousin, Michael. He runs an accounting firm here in Ibadan. He's been looking for someone for 3 months. I told him about you last week. Sandra put her cup down. You didn't say anything. I was waiting until you told me the truth about how bad it was. Grace pushed the bread toward her. Because if it was this bad, you needed something real, not just a number to call. Eat. Then we print your CV properly and we go see Michael today. Sandra looked at her friend, at the tired carrier on the chair, the baby sleeping in it, the tea still warm, the plate placed in front of her without ceremony or condition. She picked up the bread. Michael Adeyemi interviewed Sandra for 25 minutes and offered her a 6-week trial before she had left the building. She started Monday. She did not announce it at home. She simply began leaving at 8 and returning in the evenings, and because she moved through the house on Bello Street, like someone whose comings and goings were not of interest to anyone, nobody asked. The 6-week trial became a permanent position. The salary was not large, but it was reliable, and it was hers. She opened an account. She began saving with the focused quiet of a woman counting toward a specific door. At the firm, something unexpected happened. Sandra was good at her work, not just competent, genuinely good. She had the kind of organized mind that could hold multiple threads without tangling them. The kind of steady temperament that made difficult clients feel managed and difficult problems feel solvable. Michael noticed. He gave her more responsibility. She took it without fuss. Within 8 months, she was managing 3 of the firm's largest accounts. The firm began to grow. Michael took on a partner. They expanded the office, hired 2 more staff. Sandra was promoted to senior accounts officer. Then, 14 months after she had walked in with a folder of CVs and Grace's cousin's name on a piece of paper, she was made a head of accounts. She found a flat, small, clean, with a window that looked into a garden and a ceiling fan that worked silently on all 3 settings. She moved her bag, her pot, Patrick's books, which she had asked for, and he had given immediately, as if he had been waiting to be asked. She was 31 years old. She had a title on a door. She had her own table. She ate whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted, in portions that were entirely her own choosing. She had never been so quietly, solidly happy. Her relationship with her father had been slowly, carefully repaired over those 14 months. It had not been quick. Patrick had sat with her after Vivian left. She had left 6 months after Sandra moved out. Not dramatically, just with a suitcase and the particular exit of a woman whose position depended on someone else's silence, and who found that silence permanently gone. Patrick had sat with her and said the things he should have said for years. He said them badly, at first, then more honestly, then with the raw plainness of a man who has stopped trying to manage how he sounds and is simply trying to say what is true. Sandra did not rush his redemption. She made him earn it the slow way, through showing up, through Sunday dinners where he cooked himself, through learning to be a father again instead of a man who turned newspaper pages while his daughter held an empty pot. He was getting there, slowly, imperfectly, genuinely. It was enough. Kenneth came to our office on a Thursday afternoon. She looked up from her desk, and there he was in the doorway, 27 now, taller than she remembered, but wearing the same watchful expression he had worn at 12, that way of entering a room like he wasn't entirely sure he had the right to be there. Her assistant had told her someone was asking for her. She had not expected it to be him. He looked at her desk, at the nameplate, at the framed certificate on the wall behind her, at the clean, organized space of a woman who had built something real, and she saw in his face the complicated mix of emotions that the sight of someone else's arrived life produces in a person who is still searching for their own ground. He asked if he could sit. She said yes. He had finished his OND 2 years ago, he told her. He had been trying to get into a proper accounting firm since then. Application after application. 3 interviews that went well and then went nowhere. He was currently doing data entry for a small shop, work that paid barely enough and taught him nothing. He had heard she was at Adeyemi and Partners. He had heard she had risen. He had thought about coming for a long time before he came. He was not sure she would see him. Sandra listened to him. She looked at his hands folded on the table in front of her. Young hands, a little nervous. The hands of someone who has rehearsed this ask and is still not sure it was the right decision to make it. She thought about his mother, not with anger. She had made a decision about Vivian a long time ago. She did not carry the woman around with her like a wound. She had put it down. What his mother had done was between her and her own conscience and the God who keeps accounts of those things. Kenneth had been 12 years old when it started. A child inside an adult woman's choices, watching things he had not asked to witness, and carrying the weight of a home dynamic he had not created. He was not his mother. He was a young man sitting across from her, asking for a chance. She asked him 3 questions. She asked about his OND results. She asked what software he knew. She asked why he wanted to be in accounting and not something easier. His answers were careful, honest, and a little raw. He said he had always been good with numbers. He said his mother's finances had always been chaotic, and watching that had made him want to understand money properly, to be the kind of person who could build something stable. He said he knew he was not the most obvious person to be asking her this. Sandra looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "We have an entry-level opening. 6-month probationary contract. The work is not glamorous. Reconciliations, filing, support work. If you are serious, it will teach you real things. If you are not serious, you will know by month 2. Kenneth straightened in his chair. His voice was steady, but she could hear what was underneath it. "I am serious," he said. "I promise you, I am serious." She said she would have her assistant send him the paperwork by Friday. He stood to leave. At the door, he paused. He turned back. His jaw moved once before the words came out. "Sandra, thank you. I know this was not a small thing to do." She looked at him. "You are not responsible for what was difficult between your mother and me," she said, quietly. "That was then. This is now. Come in Monday prepared to work." He nodded, and he left. She turned back to her desk. Outside her window, the afternoon was doing the things Ibadan afternoons do. The light going warm and orange, the sound of traffic softening, a vendor somewhere below, calling out in that long particular street, vendor music of a city that never fully stops moving. She sat with it for a moment. The decision she had just made. It did not feel heavy. It did not feel like sacrifice. It felt clean. The way things feel when you do them from your strongest self, not from your wounded one. She had not helped Kenneth because she had forgotten what Vivian did. She had helped him because she had decided a long time ago that she would not let what was done to her determine who she became. She would not pass cruelty forward, not because it would have been understandable if she had, but because she was Sandra Obi, and that was simply not who she was. She picked up her pen and went back to work. Kenneth's 6-month probation ended with a permanent offer. He was not the fastest learner in the office, but he was consistent and honest, and he worked with a particular gratitude-fueled diligence that some people mistake for talent, but is actually something better. It is care. He cared about getting it right. Sandra watched him from a professional distance and left his development to the account manager who supervised his team because nepotism is a thing she refused, but fairness is a thing she insisted on. He did not become her friend exactly. They were not that, but they developed the particular working respect of two people who share a history that is complicated and have both chosen to stand on the clean side of it. He brought her tea sometimes when he passed her office on his rounds. She occasionally stopped in the corridor to ask how a reconciliation was coming along. It was professional. It was decent. It was enough. On a Saturday afternoon in November, Sandra sat in her small flat with the window open and a pot of pepper soup on the stove, made with all the pepper she wanted, the way she had always wanted to make it. And her phone rang. Grace. She picked up. Grace said, "I saw your father today at the market. He looked well. He was buying tomatoes and he was asking the tomato seller about her children." Sandra smiled. "He always did that," she said. "I know," Grace said. "I think he's finding himself again." Sandra sat with that for a moment. Finding himself again. Yes, that was the right language for it. Not becoming a new man. Finding the man he had always been underneath everything that grief and fear and the wrong choice had buried. She stirred a pepper soup. Outside, the afternoon was going orange. She thought about what she would tell her daughter one day, if she had one. Or the young woman in her office who sometimes looked overwhelmed and small and was clearly carrying more than she was saying. She would say, "Do not let the years of small portions convince you that small is your size. They were feeding you wrong. They were measuring you with the wrong instrument. Your actual size is the one you grow into when you leave their table and build your own." She would say, "When you rise, and you will rise, remember that rising does not require you to look back and settle scores. The settling happens on its own. Your job is to keep going forward, to keep building, to stay at your core, the person who would have made your mother proud." Mercy given from a position of strength is one of the most powerful things a woman can do. Not because it makes you look good, but because it keeps you free. The pepper soup was ready. She dished it herself. A full, generous bowl, exactly as much as she wanted. And she sat at her own table in her own flat in the life she had built from scratch. And she ate. If any part of Sandra's story touched you today, whether it was the small plate, the father who stayed silent, the friend who showed up with tea and a real opportunity, or the moment at that office door, we would love to hear from you. What part of this story stayed with you the longest? Share it in the comments. Your words matter here. And drop your location below. Your city, your country, wherever you are watching from tonight. This community stretches from Lagos to London, from Accra to Atlanta, and every name in that comment section reminds us why these stories need to be told. If you are not yet part of the Heritage Folktales Stories family, this is your moment. Click that subscribe button and join us. Every week, we bring you stories rooted in real African family life. Stories about women who endure, who rise, who forgive on their own terms, and who always, always get the last word. We will see you in the next story.